The line I always give is I'm a poet because I can't sing, allegedly. Um, I was a slow starter, I guess. I mean, I did write lyrics for songs for bands that didn't exist, so there was that. And as a teenager, I read novels, and the move into poetry was quite slow. Um, I was an undergrad in Dublin, and I was probably, I veered towards the more poetic type of novel like James Joyce, Samuel Beckett, and probably came to poetry through there. Um, when I was a teenager, I didn't read the Northern Irish poets because I was sort of, well, it's a lie, I did read them, but I read them as an angry young man. And it was probably not until I was about 20 or so where sort of Paul Muldoon, Kieran Carson, poets like that spoke out to me. And then I started reading the poets from where I was from, the north of Ireland, with a sense of real urgency, and from there on, I was hooked. I had left Belfast, but I found myself returning to something I didn't think I would do because I was fired up by Northern Irish poetry, and I became a postgrad at Queen's. I worked under Edna Longley. And I plunged into sort of academic postgraduate work, and I've now become an academic for my sins. The writing of poetry I did in spare time during that time. It was another sort of 8-9 years before the first book came out, 2004. So I did write poems in Dublin. I did readings in pubs, and then I decided to go away and stop doing that until I got better. So it was, I spent my time as a postgraduate in Queen's, surrounded by great poetry, and I was the first employee of the Seamus Heaney Centre. So I was immersed and working with poetry, but then it was kind of like a coming out, as it were, something I've been doing in the closet for several years. And the first book came out quite quickly after that. About 2 years later, I'd moved to Edinburgh, and I've just continued on ever since. I guess it's quite a full-on book. I had in the back of my mind, it was probably in my late 30s as I wrote it, and it was maybe time to grow up. And then I decided not to bother with that. There's enough time for maturity somewhere around the corner. So the lead poem is very much a fantasia, and it's meant to be, not sure how funny it is, but it's meant to be a sort of rollicking comedy nightmare poem in a sort of a sort of Irish tradition of sort of ghost stories and, Melmoth the Wanderer and that sort of 19th century Gothic tradition, but in a sort of modern sort of tone. So I think I asked for the reader to take a plunge, and if the reader takes the plunge, then I hope they are taken on a trip, which will take an unexpected twists and turns as the poems go on. There's quite a few sequences, quite a few narrative poems. There's a poem which is a sort of a noir ballad about ex-gangsters in the wilds of the north, based on a very sort of a hackneyed ballad, and it's meant to be sort of begin as a sort of pastiche, but then it's meant to sort of deepen and darken as it goes along. There are a lot of poems just about getting in the car, going for a drive, or going out for a walk. And like I say, I want the reader to feel like they're just being led somewhere as they read them. There's a poem, two paired poems. Well, there's a pair called At Dawn and at Dusk. They're meant to be modelled on Milton's L'Allegro, and Il Penseroso is Ode to Joy and his Ode to Melancholy. If you read those poems by Milton, the joyful one isn't any happier than the melancholy one. And it turns out it's very, very hard to write a poem about being happy. So but they're just looking at the city, which is not necessarily Belfast or Edinburgh. I found in this book, I'd written a lot about Belfast specifically and become known as a Belfast poet, but I've been living in Edinburgh for several years and writing this in Edinburgh. That they become mixed up. I start writing about one and it'll become the other and back again. I've decided just not to worry about that. It's just the city in capital letters. There's poems about walking through the city and trying to come to terms with what is out the front window when you wake up in the morning. And as you go to bed at night, here comes the night. And that is the theme. So there are still some sort of angry poems in there, but hopefully there's a lot of fun to be had as well. I'm delighted. You have to be extremely pleased anytime you're put in with an audience. But for me, it's not a complaint at all. I'm from Ireland. I'm an Irish poet. I've grouped with Irish poets and have been throughout my career. And that is as it should be. But I'm very excited about being grouped in with a different group of peers from across these islands, as we say. I'm aware. I've always been energised by the diversity and the sort of always excited when new books come along, which are doing something new with poetry. So it'd be super if I'm put together with some. We'll see what happens.